All right, hello. My name is Ian Blair. As Isabella stated, I am the Policy Program Director at Wetlands Watch. I got to do some lobbying this General Assembly, and I got to advocate for some bills. But we are a C3, so it is less than whatever percentage underneath a C4 that would need to be doing advocacy for. But we'll start off. Took some photos. And I'm going to start this presentation. Initially, I'm going to go over just the General Assembly so everyone's got a baseline of what to expect and like how the General Assembly works. Then I picked some bills I think you might be interested in learning about. I, with my position at Wetlands Watch, generally follow coastal bills, but I was sitting in so many committees that I got to expand and listen to some really interesting bills I did not know about. I can talk about those. There are some that I was following, but I wasn't in the room for. And so I kind of just wrote text on it of like what happened looking at LAS. And I can try to answer some questions, but then there are some that are completely out of my depth. And I just showed them to like, hey, if you want to do research, check these out. I think that'd be interesting to you. So let's begin. We do nature-based solutions through a cross-sector program area. Gabby, who is our living green infrastructure as well as our community science person. I do policy. We've got some people who do climate adaptation, local planning, and wetlands just happens to be our initial thing, but now we've kind of moved into that climate adaptation world. We had a turbulent start for the General Assembly. You may remember just a couple of weeks ago, we had the Richmond water crisis, and the General Assembly, all the legislators got to experience what it's like not having water. And so for someone who does water-related things, this was both bad for the people of Richmond, but it also heightened the need for having water supply planning, and it came at a timely time. So General Assembly 101. We got a bicameral system. Okay, it's got two chambers. The House of Delegates is made up of 100 members with 2-year terms. In 2025, this session, we had 51 Democrats, 49 Republicans, and 0 independents. I'm noting these, but if at the end of each session, you can actually go and look at caucus unity, and you can see how individuals voted within party lines or outside of party lines, and that will be a theme throughout some of the bills that will be mentioned later. The Senate is 40 members. They serve 4-year terms. They also 21 Democrats, 19 Republicans, 0 independents in the 2025 session. Because it was an odd year, our session was short with 45 days. Even years are 60 days. Generally, General Assembly does legislating stuff. I came from Texas, which is also a part-time legislature, which is the next point. But Texas meets every other year for 140 days. So figuring out how the Virginia legislature works, General Assembly works, the learning curve was steep, but I feel like, well, understanding what's happening right now, we are still waiting for the budget. The budget has not yet, as of like before this meeting started, I had not seen that the official budget was announced. So where we are, we're really honestly over here. Honestly, we're even maybe into conference right now. It started January 8th. It's going to end February 22nd. Bills are introduced. The Speaker of the House assigns bills to a committee, or the Clerk of the Senate assigns bills to the Senate. These go to the full committee, then they get assigned to a subcommittee, and then those work their way back into the chamber. In the chamber, they're heard 3 times. The first time is just to hear what's happening. The second time is to suggest edits, and the third is to pass or fail or move forward. February 4th was crossover, so all the bills that made it out of the House got sent to the Senate. All the ones that made it to the Senate got sent to the House. They had to do the whole thing all over again. The clerk and the speaker sent them back to the right committees. They got sent to the subcommittees. Obviously, this is a short session, so all of these bills, when they got crossed over, only had a week to get out of subcommittee, and if they didn't get on that docket, then they died and just were left there. Because this is an odd numbered year, there is no continuing. So if it's left, it just dies, as opposed to sometimes you can continue if it's an even number year to an odd number year. We're here just to if you're looking at LAS and you're like, what's going on? There are 3 votes that you should know. The voice vote is just verbal expression of yay, nay, or abstain. The presiding officer decides who prevails. Recorded vote is actually what gets recorded. You can view each legislator's voting history in the record, which is in the journal, which is held in the Library of Virginia. And then on block vote, if there are a bunch of bills that are not contested, aka like everyone supports them, they might all group them together and just have one vote on a whole bunch of bills. Or vice versa, if everyone doesn't like them, they might just all group them together and just kill them. But all of these votes have actions, and it can be kind of confusing for someone who's looking through LAS for the first time. And LAS is the Legislative Information System, where you can kind of see how bills are going through the General Assembly. Carry over, they're going to talk about it next session. Obviously, this didn't happen this session. Laid on table, aka tabled. We see tabling or gently lay on table in the House. We don't really see that language in the Senate, but essentially the bill is defeated. Incorporate is when 2 bills get combined, no action taken, aka left. The bill just never gets docketed, and then it's pending, and then at the end of the session it dies. Pass by indefinitely is a tabling, but the Senate's version of saying this, it generally means like the bill is killed. Sometimes it can be brought back if another person in a subcommittee, longer session does it, but because we only had 1 week, and if natural resources meets, Wednesdays, you can only bring it up in that subcommittee meeting on that Wednesday. It's unlikely that it will be brought back up. Pass by day, sometimes a bill is not ready when it's being heard at the time. So the senator, the legislator, delegate, senator will ask to pass by the day just so that they can get the language right, so that they can then bring it up before the committee ends. I have seen that happen. Reporting is what everyone wants. Report without amendment is approved, no changes. Report with amendment, some language change, or report with substitute, there are major changes in the text. Re-referral, I often saw this where something would go into natural resources, but it had some money attached to it, so it needed to be re-referred to finance and appropriation, or appropriation, depending on the House or the Senate. And then they had to go and vote it out before it could get back into the chamber. And then strike, where the legislator, to save face, takes the bill off the docket. And that's just a voice vote where everyone approves and they just move forward. So we've established what the timeline is. We're at the last week. It's all going to end in 2 days. And still waiting on the budget. These are the votes. What did it look like at crossover? I took some, just a screenshot to figure out what was happening. So all of this is based off of February 4th data. There were 2,429 total legislative items, which include bills, resolutions, and joint resolutions. 1,994 of those were bills. At the time I took this, there was a 50% pass rate in the House, a 54% pass rate in the Senate, and a 51% cumulative pass rate. If you're looking at the numbers on the graph, they're not going to add up because I didn't include anything that was incorporated, and I didn't include any of the pending, where something was like still on the docket, but it had not yet been killed. And so the pending numbers and the incorporated numbers are why, if you're trying to do the math in your head, they're not adding up. So now we're getting into the bills. I know a lot about the bills on this page, and feel free to ask more information, because some of these were my bills, or bills that I was following really closely. HB 2030-48 was the bill I worked with Delegate Hernandez here in Norfolk. It was the flood risk disclosure bill. It unfortunately did not make it. Looking at the entire timeline of that bill from 2024 to 2025, it started as HB 863. It was a very robust, comprehensive flood risk disclosure bill that would have been the most comprehensive flood risk disclosure bill in the country, in a way where Texas technically has the most comprehensive flood risk disclosure bill, but they took 2 years to add renters in, and Delegate Hernandez opted to do both homeowners and renters in that HB 863. It got sent to the Virginia Housing Commission. It was heard all throughout 2024, initially in June. He made calls in August, September, to talk with the commission members. it looked like it was going to make it out. It made it out of the work group, but it did not make it out of the full commission. So using the language that he was working with, he found some compromises with some other members, and essentially it was actual knowledge of FEMA designated flood hazard areas, aka the 100-year and the 500-year flood hazard area. That was what he ran with. He got Delegate Moorfield, Delegate Clark, and I'm missing one other delegate, bipartisan support for the bill. Unfortunately, it did get tabled in subcommittee, and so we do not have flood risk disclosure in Virginia as of right now. Other bills on here, the Dam Safety Act will streamline and clarify responsibilities of dam owners who are in rural areas that, if they fail, won't have catastrophic events on any population. And it cleans up DCR's authority if there is an emergency, as well as streamlines due to inspection reporting for those. But I have it as CO, as it's crossed over. SB 857, they're both companion, has already passed, but HB 2000 is still yet to be heard. I think it's going to be heard today. Another interesting one, stormwater management regulations. Their HB 2212 was from Delegate O'Quinn, and I think SB 1365 was Senator Celine. Don't quote me on that. I'll have to look that up. Essentially, it was going to roll back stormwater regulations outside of the Chesapeake Bay back to the pre-2014 regulations. It ended up getting tabled, but it was an interesting attempt to because I sat through the subcommittee hearing. Essentially, the costs of stormwater management regulations were high in some rural areas, and they were asking for a rollback to a time when they wouldn't have to try to enforce those higher standards. But it seems like when you consider that all of the precipitation increases that we've seen since 2006, higher standards are actually going to help everyone out. So I just want to point that out. And then another interesting one was rainwater harvesting systems. I'm not familiar with rainwater harvesting systems, but Tier 4 is potable water, aka like some water that you could take at like a car wash, and it's conforming those of the Virginia Department of Health public health ordinances, so that you could use that sort of water for those sorts of uses. That would then also help if you're thinking about regional water supply initiatives, having people collect their own water and then use it that way. And that has passed. So all of these, if they're red, they have failed. If they have a green check, they have passed. And if they have a CO, they've crossed over, and they're being waiting to be read for the third time in a specific chamber, the House or the Senate. Okay, moving on to land use and transportation. In the Virginia Housing Commission, which is where the flood risk disclosure bill, I had to sit and wait and to hear my bill, so I got to hear some other interesting ones. And the affordable housing crisis has been a big one, specifically in the Virginia Housing Commission. And there are a lot there. I think there are 3 different types of bills for faith and housing zoning overlay, essentially allowing religious institutions that own land to build affordable housing on that land. This one, which is Senator Hashmi's bill, did not make it out, but I like the innovation that people are thinking about. Rural EV Infrastructure Fund, it did pass. It passed on party lines, and I was just in a meeting that people think it's not going to get the governor's signature, so maybe this is also something we may see, that bills are passing, but at the end of the day, the governor decides, and if he does veto it, it's very difficult to get out because you need 2/3 majority. HB 2660 is shortening the initial review period. I thought planners might be interested in that, from 60 to 40 days. And then the abandoned mine land grant retention fund did cross over, but it has yet to be heard. It's supposed to be heard probably today, HB 1948. Next up, trees and nature. I did advocate on behalf of HB 1941. It's the invasive plant labeling bill that has a penalty, essentially telling retail stores that are selling invasive plants that they should label them and promote alternatives, generally native plants. It did pass, but also with party lines. If you want to be inspired and you're someone who likes to watch General Assembly recordings in the Library of Congress or online, HB 2630 is a great bill. It was Delegate Willett in Henrico County. A third grader named Liam brought forward this tree canopy replacement fund. Essentially, this would allow localities to establish a tree canopy replacement fund in the case that a developer can't preserve any trees. And on top of that developer paying into this tree canopy replacement fund, it also allows nonprofits to be recipients of the money, so that if you have like a Friends of Live Oaks or a tree group in your area, they would be able to get those and then plant trees so that we could maintain urban tree canopy throughout the Commonwealth. Wildlife corridors and crossings did not make it. I had followed that one. It was trying to combine the wildlife crossing plan with flood plans, and because I have friends in Washington State, I got a chat with them about how that would work, and they said that that was an easy move, specifically with aquatic organism passage. But they had different contexts. It unfortunately did not make it out. I think it was in the wrong code section. Oak Hill Farm State Park was an interesting one. Delegate Lopez brought it forward. It's actually in London County, but it is the former home of President Monroe and the only presidential property in private hands. The family that owns it is getting older, and they needed to move quickly if they were gonna either sell it to someone or they give it to the state. As of yesterday, it was going to be completed with non-general funding, and it still remains, or I think the vote will happen today. It's waiting for the third hearing. And then Virginia's Great Outdoors Act was going to be a big ask, $200 million annually for land preservation. It had a long line of supporters when I saw it go through. It fortunately was passed by really early on in the session. So trees and nature. Solar was a big solar was big. I feel like there was another big hot ticket item. The Delegate Boliva's solar canopies on surface parking areas, HB 2037, did pass through. And I just saw that HB 2090, which is multifamily shared connections, did pass through. The two that failed were special sightings for solar, special exceptions for solar siting, as well as certificate of necessity of new solar facilities. They were killed really quickly. But solar being a big ticket item, the bigger one, energy is also big. We're going to talk about it. The energy had at least 30 bills that I was aware of. I chose 3. So much was happening. A really interesting one that I saw was HB 2346, Delegate Hernandez. It was a virtual power plant pilot program. Essentially, like use an algorithm to tap into, see if people who had solar, they weren't using it, to like reroute that in the neighborhood so that the energy load would be done. It's just a pilot study. It did pass, and I'm curious to see. I will be following it to see what happens. And then SB 1190. I have SB 1434, which was incorporated into SB 1190. It ended up dying yesterday, and that was one where, even though the Democrats held the Senate, some Democrats opted to not vote for it. My understanding of reading through that, I think it was Senator Perry, was that it was a slippery slope of a state mandate and wanting to allow localities to have that option for solar siting and energy siting. So that was the reason she voted for that. She didn't want to restrict that, a locality's ability to figure out what they want, specifically in rural areas. But data centers was the big one. I think there were 17 bills that at one point that we're going through. Why I bring this up, JLARC just put out a study on data centers. It was published in December. Things that I'm highlighting that I thought were interesting that you may find interesting is that there is an immense increase in energy demand, almost 200% increase based off the study. I sat through some other committees. Water use, while is currently sustainable, it will be growing because these data centers need to cool. And so if you have data centers growing in your area, you may want to consider that where that water supply is going to be coming from. And then the last one, I didn't have it bulleted, but noise near residential areas is unique. And that when the person was describing it, most noise ordinances are based on decibel levels, but data centers are very low decibel, but high frequency. And apparently that low decibel high frequency creates this irritating sound for people around it that would need to be workshopped and change some noise ordinance language so that it also includes that frequency part and not is just like someone going out for the decibel reader and being like, hey, it's underneath the ordinance, we can move forward. So take that information as you will. Current DEQ initiatives that kind of tie into this data center. Right now, the DEQ is doing the climate action, the comprehensive climate action plan. They're doing listening sessions around the state, specifically targeting what greenhouse gas emissions that they are looking to reduce. It's based by sector. And I went to the Tidewater listening session out here, and people were talking about data centers and how that would be increasing energy. And energy was honestly the big ticket of like, how can we reduce our individual energy bills in that listening session. And then I don't know if you are aware, but the regional water supply planning was amended in October of 2024. And I looked up counties in the Thomas Jefferson PDC area. It looks like Middle James 1 and Middle James 2. And you can see the counties there and city. They haven't yet happened yet, but they should happen before April 7th. Right now, the grants are open. They close March 31st. Essentially, it's localities that are part of this regional planning unit, RPU, have to put together a single jointly filed regional water supply plan that looks at the risks and how they're going to avoid the risks. So that's going on as we move throughout 2025. Within the data center bills, lots of them died. The one that passed was HB 1601, and that was just site assessments of data centers. Right now, SB 1449 is in conference, which is what that blue symbol is, and we'll see if it makes it out. But lots of data center thoughts that did not go through because people could not agree. Budget tracking, budget hasn't come out, or it did not come out at least as of 10 o'clock today. These are items that I was tracking mostly around climate and water and agriculture. So increased VCAP funding in the House, 500,000. George Mason University is identified as the state climate office, but that's just language. We are getting environmental literacy funding, or at least the House had put forward that 750,000. Stormwater Local Assistance Fund was going to get 50 million next year, and then there were some groundwater research in the eastern part. That was that. The budget conferees are listed here. Why I bring them up is if you did have a question about the budget, or if you were trying to get something through, I would point you to one of these members because they are the ones that hold all the cards as of right now. But if that budget is done, then we are just waiting to see what happens. And so next steps, we got 2 days until the session adjourns, and then we've got the reconvene session. So the governor has 30 days after the General Assembly session to amend or veto bills that have passed. That date is going to be March 24th, 2025 at midnight. Reconvene session then happens the 6th Wednesday after adjournment, so that is April 2nd, 2025. And then the governor amendment, any amendment needs a simple majority to pass, so 21 votes in the Senate, 51 votes in the House. And if the amendment fails, the governor can decide to veto the bill or sign it without the amendment. It will not go back. And then if the governor vetoes, it takes 2/3 of the vote of both chambers to override that governor's veto. So if there is a veto, it's unlikely that bill will make it out because the caucus unity that's going on. And that is everything. I will pass this over to Gabby to talk about our Community Flood Preparedness Fund. Or Isabella, would it be better to do questions now? What do you think works? I have not been checking the chat.
Maybe after both of your presentations, we'll take questions, but if anybody has some now, put those in the chat so we can be thinking about that. Thank you so much, Ian. That was so informative. I'm really excited about the Tree Canopy Fund and solar over impervious surfaces and that invasive species labeling. That's really good news. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I feel like I learn something new every time I hear Ian speak about the General Assembly. That initial Wetlands Watch overview slide definitely hits the point that we've got different experts on the team. And so it's really fun for us to do joint presentations like this because I get to hear a little bit of Ian's world. And we work together on the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, but sometimes he comes in on Catch the King stuff and environmental education stuff. So it's been a fun collaboration. So yeah, we're going to switch gears for a minute and talk a little bit about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Gabby Kinney, Assistant Director of the Living Infrastructure Program at Wetlands Watch. I've been doing flood risk outreach to local governments and technical assistance on the CFPF for 3 years now. I'm also a certified floodplain manager myself, trying to figure out how I can overlap my floodplain management skills with my new green infrastructure role. So if you've got any ideas at that intersection, I'm wide open, but working for the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals Training Program, which we won't have time to talk about today, but it's a wonderful certificate program that we run across the state. Actually, I think maybe I do mention it a little bit later on, but if you're interested in green infrastructure certificate programming, I'm now the co-coordinator for Virginia, so feel free to reach out if you're interested in that. So let's get into CFPF. A little bit of overview. This is a statewide grant and loan resource. Primarily, localities have applied for and received grant funding. Loans were only formatted to be offered in the CFPF as of last year. So loans are very new, but we're also, the grant resources are just second to none for the state. There is no other state resource doing what the CFPF is doing. And we're going to kind of talk about what some of those important key pieces are. PDCs and local governments are eligible applicants for this grant funding. So this is what's in quotes here is the direct language from the grant manual. This also includes soil and water conservation districts. And there is also, actually, Ian, I don't know where this stands, but there was language in the General Assembly to reinstate tribes as eligible applicants of the CFPF. Do you have an update on that before I move on? I forget if that's one that we're tracking.
Yes, HB 2077 is in conference right now. Unfortunately, Senator Marsden's companion bill had some language that referred to a code section that involved Reggie. And so the Democrats did not want the governor messing with that Reggie code language. So they are going to try to cut that section out and only have it be the code section of the Virginia code that talks about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and not Reggie. So it's still, okay, cool. it might pass, but it's in conference right now.
Great, thank you. Yeah, sorry for that blip. I was just curious. So yeah, if that language passes, tribes, federally recognized and state tribes will be reinstated as eligible applicants for this funding as well. So we really hope that that is a possibility because there was language in the first round manual to afford that to them, but then it was revoked in later versions of the manual. So be on the lookout for that. This manual is always changing. Small things here and there, but Wetlands Watch really closely tracks every manual revision each year. And we provide comments each year based on our engagement with localities and PDCs. So anytime we hear something that localities would like to be changed about the manual that seems beneficial for the good, we try to make sure we communicate that to DCR in their revision process. So The Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation is the state agency that administers this grant. So far, there have been 4 full annual grant rounds for the CFPF. We're currently on round 5. And over the course of those 4 years, I guess it's really 3 years, they had done 2 years where they administered 2 rounds within the same year, kind of on a wonky schedule. But last year, they actually approved some language that said they're going to do it annually now. So everybody's kind of all on the same page of when this is coming out. $151 million has been distributed across Virginia from this pot of funding. There's also some state allocation to the fund. I think $100 million in the budget last year was allocated, and then prior, for the 3 years we were in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, all proceeds from those auctions were coming into this fund. So there's still a large sum of money sitting in this pot. It will still continue to be annually distributed as long as there are funds, and will only increase funds with additional budget allocations or if we reinstate our contract with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So those are some of the things that we're watching as well. $65 million in the current round. So this one opened in September of last year and closed at the end of January. $65 million was requested. That's about 70 applications from local governments and PDCs across the state. And the award announcements for that should come around, what my guess is, around Q2 in 2025. So I'm guessing like April, maybe the end of March, if we're lucky. DCR has some staff capacity issues, and they're going through a lot of transition and have a lot of big plans on their plate this year. So the CFPF timeline can be a little wonky, but they still do get them out there, which is great. And again, PDCs and localities, of course, are encouraged to apply. A little bit of breakdown on the CFPF itself. There are 3 grant categories within the CFPF: planning and capacity building, studies, and projects. The really neat thing about the CFPF is it's designed for localities and regional governments to build upon the work that they're doing with the CFPF. If your locality or your region does not have a local resilience plan, this is where DCR encourages most people to start, and is kind of what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. That planning category is really low-hanging fruit money for localities who have a lot of flood risk issues in their community, but maybe have some outdated stormwater infrastructure, or maybe would like to take an inventory of sites that are at high flood risk, an inventory of repetitive loss properties, and then most critically, planning for the future. So talking about flood risk into the future. Those flood resilience plans go a long way in providing the community with that resource. Capacity building also means hiring or training a staff member to become a certified floodplain manager. So for that stamp of approval on certain development projects, you need a certified floodplain manager. That is something that can fund that position. Studies are anything from hydrologic studies, again, stormwater inventories, needs assessments, benefit analysis for green infrastructure, all sorts of things related to flood resilience that you might want to sink your teeth into because you know that this is an issue in your community. Maybe some of the most recent floods have been impactful in your area. I'm looking outside my window and seeing a winter wonderland in Williamsburg and thinking about all the snow melt that we're going to have this year and already have been having. So a lot of those issues that are popping up are things that you can address in your resilience plan and through studies. The only catch with the CFPF is that you can't go directly to the project funding pot unless you have a flood resilience plan in place. And again, this can happen locally or regionally. If a regional member goes for the CFPF funding, gets a resilience plan, or you already have one, the locality in which a project is going to be implemented has to adopt that flood resilience plan and formally adopt it. So again, trying to connect all of these critical elements of flood resilience and future thinking comes with the development of that resilience plan. In it, you can identify projects into the future, and that makes it really easy to come back to the CFPF the year following and apply for project funding for something you've identified in your flood resilience plan. A little bit more detail. Round 5, again, closed January 24th. If you're curious, I have a couple of links on this screen, and I'm sure we'll share these slides with you guys, so feel free to check these out later on. The DCR website lists all of the awards of prior CFPF rounds as hyperlinks. You can actually go in and see other locality and regional government applications, which is one of the parts of our job. Is we spend some time with these applications and go through them to pull out best practices. If a locality is new to the fund and is looking for a planning and capacity building grant, we try to match them with those application materials that are public on DCR's website, so you can get a feel for how others are applying for these funds. If you want to go a step further and see actually some cool like visuals related to some of the projects, the Virginia Conservation Network is kind of a community network of organizations across Virginia, many of them involved in the General Assembly, but a lot of them are partners and close colleagues. It's a wonderful group that actually catalogs individual awards by locality. So that link underneath the photo takes you to a website on the VCN page, and you can click around the map to find awards in your district, and you can pull up a little fact sheet on it that talks about some quick facts of the different projects. So if you're not quite in the mood to go to the DCR website and pull up a whole application and learn all sorts of things about a locality that you might not want to know, you can do some quick and easy fact sheeting on the VCN website. So feel free to check out those if you're curious what others are applying for. This image here on the right shows the distribution of awards from rounds 1 through 4. So this will be updated once DCR, since the round has closed, they've announced how much was requested and how many applications were released, but they have yet to publish those applications to their website. So we don't have final numbers on how this funding has been distributed yet. But if you're quick at looking at graphs and charts, you can very much see that the coastal area takes up a lot of this funding. So the Hampton Roads area in particular, $81.7 million has gone from the CFPF into the Hampton Roads area. And this is largely due to DCR's lack of capacity and being able to do outreach on this fund, which is where Wetlands Watch steps in. So we know these funds are available statewide, but we know that local governments out in the western and southwestern part of the state might not even know that the CFPF exists. And so we have stepped in as kind of this technical assistance org to help localities get into this space to get this really low-hanging critical resilience funding. But we just like to show this distribution chart because we really would love to see more funding go out into the western part of the state to keep the CFPF going and keep it a successful money for you guys. Re-emphasizing regional and local capacity building. So the PDC can step up where the locality can't and vice versa. So if the locality has a lot of capacity and can do a local resilience plan, which we'll talk about on the next slide, they're more than welcome to, but the PDC can also have a role, and soil and water districts can also have a role because you can go for a resilience plan that's encompassing of all the localities in your district, which is really fun. The CFPF also encourages, and many localities who apply for resilience plan funding, they like to align this with some of the other regional water and natural resource conservation initiatives in your area. In some cases, this looks like VCAP or VAX if you've got agriculture and rural projects, stormwater best management practices, everything that Isabella kind of chimed in at the top to share with you guys. This fund really likes to align with those efforts in the community. So if you've already got projects in mind, you're already thinking about nature-based solutions, wetlands restoration, buffers, anything like that that helps with floodplain management, this fund is intended to align with those projects. PDCs can take that leadership role in implementing the plans. There's sometimes PDCs have more capacity to put out ROIs for, RFPs, all of the acronyms in my brain this morning. RFPs for contractors are sometimes handled at the PDC level and vice versa. So lots of regional support for the localities. And then my favorite part, here's the ROI. Pre-disaster planning means increased return on investment. So there are studies out there that give you kind of the direct, I think it's for every $1 spent on pre-disaster planning, $6 is saved. And what that means is that the more you plan ahead, the more safe you can be for events that you might not expect, or some of those kind of 1% annual chance storms that are coming through. These plans are meant to help communities think through that and what are some of the safety measures we should put in place to help keep our community protected. So more investment in pre-disaster and planning means less money spent on recovery. And I know that we've all been seeing a lot of those storms roll through. We had a horrible hurricane season last year. Hurricane Helene, I'm looking at you. And so this work is really critical as we move into the future of just uncertainty with those events. DCR finally released a formal list of all of the localities in Virginia who have an approved resilience plan. If your locality is not on this list, we definitely encourage you to either work with your PDC, work with your soil and water district, or if you've got capacity, to go for CFPF funding for a resilience plan in your community. This is something that of course, resilience plans have kind of been building over the past couple of years, but there's been no true way to know at what stage in the process localities are at with the approval of those plans. Once you have one developed, you send it to DCR and they either approve it or send it back with revisions, and you kind of do a bit of back and forth until you can get it approved and all the information that's needed is there. So this is the list as of now, but we of course hope that every locality in Virginia gets to have a flood resilience plan for those that have high flood risk. Resilience plans help identify projects. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. It's a great way to kind of sit down and look at your community and actually put pen to paper about where in your community there's flood risk and what you can potentially do to mitigate it. So great way to just kind of sit down and make a list of projects that are potential. Resilience plans consider those future outlooks. So risk into the future, there's a lot of data modeling happening across the state. DCR is about to release an update to the Coastal Resilience Master Plan that makes it a statewide flood master plan. So resources like that are coming out to help predict future flood risk that you can incorporate into your resilience plan. So there's tons of resources out there to help with that. And studies, of course, if you apply for the CFPF, you don't need a resilience plan to access the study funding. So planning and capacity building and studies can sometimes go together. You can, if you want to first just do a quick assessment across the community, you can go for study funding first before you touch a resilience plan, and kind of wiggle it around like that. But projects are the only ones that require an approved resilience plan. So all of these localities on this list can now go for project funding through the CFPF. Public engagement. So switching over kind of more to the local perspective of why you might want to do a resilience plan. If you feel like you want a method for improving your engagement with the public on what they're experiencing in terms of flood risk, a resilience plan is a fabulous way to do that. There are a lot of contractors across the state who help set up community meetings, regional environmental meetings, just like this one, working with PDCs to help get information out across the districts. And so it's just a wonderful kind of initiative that folks can get behind because many folks experience this flood risk on a very personal and individual level. So if you're hoping to engage with your residents a little bit more, fill in the gaps in your maps and things like that, it's a great opportunity for that. And again, can't stress it enough, investing in that pre-disaster planning means that you will spend less money on recovery as those projects get implemented. So very, very critical process. This is a teeny tiny screenshot. Definitely don't feel like you have to read all of this. This is in the Community Flood Preparedness Fund manual, and we've actually hyperlinked that manual to this image here. This is a list of the requirements to include in your resilience plan from the DCR CFPF manual. So this is kind of your template for what should be included in that plan. Some of those highlights mean identifying nature-based infrastructure and incorporating them as much as possible. So instead of using gray or hardened structures, you might want to look at pervious or nature-based structures for flood mitigation. And the real goal of that, bringing on my certified floodplain manager hat, is that floodplains are meant to be naturalized. So water can be best absorbed with as much nature as possible. So if you've got communities that are developed towards the water's edge, if you have streams that don't have extensive buffers, all of this is in the name of kind of restoring the function of our floodplains so that they can keep us safe and keep our communities safe. Encompassing all flood issues in a community or region. This is not just, it doesn't have to just be rainfall. It can be sea level rise. It can be snow melt. It can be hurricanes, it can be dams, which there is a separate DCR fund for dam safety, but doing a catalog of all the at-risk dams in your community could potentially be a study that ends up in your resilience plan. So things like that that are on the to-do list can definitely make it into the resilience plan. And it also identifies priority areas for flood mitigation. So spending time with this and thinking about these resilience principles in your community means that you'll have a better idea of where projects need to be implemented. and what staff you might need to support that. The CFPF does not fund existing staff salary, but it does fund new positions. Actually, I think I have a slide on that, so I'm gonna pause on that and come back to it. And it allows for coordination with other local plans. So your hazard mitigation plan, your comprehensive plan, your resilience plan also is updated every 5 years. So you can align it with the other tracks that you've got going on, or not align it, depending on, I'm sure nobody wants to do 3 plans at one time. So a nice way to kind of keep everything on the right timeline. So what I was just saying, CFPF unfortunately does not fund existing staff salary, but there are ways to kind of nudge around this. And this is, again, where Wetlands Watch tries to step in. You can hire new staff. So if you don't have an environmental resilience planner or a flood resilience planner, they can create a new position for that and fully fund it with the CFPF. Or you can create new tasks for existing staff. They have to be distinct. And so that's something that Wetlands Watch helps out with. There are tons of applications to refer to that call this out. And it shows, so if you have an existing staff person who might want to transfer into the position of environmental planner, that is something that can be funded by the CFPF, if that makes sense. But you can't fund existing staff salary for the things that you're applying to the CFPF for. The locality must also include replacement costs should a procedure for replacement costs should a project fail under normal operating conditions. This is something that we've been working with DCR on through our couple of comment letters over the past few years. We think this is a bit of ambiguous language and potentially sets the locality up to have a project in place and just not, if something happens naturally to that project, defining what that means is not very specific through the CFPF manual. So we're trying to work with DCR to clarify that so that localities aren't held accountable for things that were completely out of their hands or acts of God and things like that. So just a couple of limitations to keep in mind, and we're of course happy to talk through those anytime. Wetlands Watch can help with project and priority identification in your community. So if you're interested in this, and this is all pro bono, Wetlands Watch has grant funding to do this. If you would like some assistance in getting CFPF, it is totally free of charge to you guys. We want you to get these funds. So we're helping with helping identify those projects in your resilience plan. We can help you look at existing plans and studies in your community. Grant writing and application support. We will take your application and review it and edit it as much as you would like us to. Clarification and connections to DCR staff. So as I mentioned, we're very active on the comment letter cycle, and we're also very deeply connected with DCR flood resilience staff. So if you've got questions that might go above and beyond, we are more than happy to make those connections to DCR staff. We have tons of resources. I think I might have a picture of it on the next slide, but we have resources that help spread the word. So anything from just background information on the CFPF to what a flood resilience plan application would look like, as well as a contractor list for those who have worked on resilience plans across the state. Lots of really cool resources that we're trying to get the word out with. And then we can also support your other resilience initiatives. The CFPF is a big one, but we also do things like the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals Program. So that's workforce development and stormwater management BMPs. And we are the chair for the Virginia Community Rating System work group in the state. So if you're an NFIP enrolled community and you're interested in getting incentives for going above and beyond the base minimum standard of the NFIP, you can actually get insurance premium discounts on that for your residents and your community through the Virginia Community Rating System. So a little bit of incentives for doing kind of going above and beyond those minimum requirements for flood safety in your community. And then this is my last slide, just a list of resources that we have linked on here, which again, you'll have access to. There's that DCR CFPF page where they list all of the applications. We have our own tracking page where we kind of build out some of those graphics that I showed earlier, and all of those resources, list of applications funded, the CFPF fact sheet that I just mentioned, local resilience plan overview, consultant list, and then the VCN fact sheet website is down here as well. And that's it. That's my rapid fire overview of the CFPF. Thank you guys so much. And Isabella, thank you so much for having us. We're here for questions. I think I might have gone over time just a tad, but feel free to pop questions in the chat. I'll hang out for the rest of the meeting.
I was having trouble getting off mute, but thank you so much, Gabby. That was so informative. It looks like we do have a few questions in the chat if you just want to look through. And please do share your slides either with me or directly to the group. I think that would be super helpful.
Yes. Okay. Oh, so do you want me to answer them in the chat or answer them live? I didn't want to take up your
I
time.
think, yeah, you can answer them here. It's okay. Maybe
cool.
just 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So great question about hazard mitigation plans. I have not dug into the total breadth of hazmat plans. That's part of my CFM hat that I'm working on. But it's really, I think hazard mitigation plans like to identify things like critical infrastructure, so things that are in the flood hazard area, looking at your flood risk maps. And the flood resilience plan is kind of separates itself out because it's looking into the future. So this is a comprehensive analysis of where is flood risk in your community? What kind of flood risk is it? So is it rainfall? Is it sea level rise? Is it some other source of flooding that you're experiencing? Soil erosion, things like that. And it takes that and goes one step further into, okay, what are the projects we can implement in our community that help us stay safe into the future? Hazmat plans definitely do that to some regard, but this is meant to be like your comprehensive look at flooding in your community. So if you need things updated, if you need your stormwater infrastructure updated, things like that, there's even funding for public engagement in this grant program of public engagement around flooding and things like that. So really just comprehensive to that specific issue. And again, it sets you up for, without a flood resilience plan, you can't access the project funding of the CFPF, but resilience plans can also be helpful for other state and federal funds related to the same way you would use a hazmat plan as a reference for your community kind of jumping on this topic. A flood resilience plan could help you get funds for more resilience work.
Thank you. That's super helpful. So much more specific to flooding and project-based, it seems like, are the two kind of big things.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, thank you again, Gabby and Ian. I think the other one maybe just answer in the chat, and your other one you answered while presenting. So we appreciate you guys so much. Thank you. And I will move over into my portion of the agenda where we give PDC updates. Let me just stop the recording if I can.